Welcome to episode 339 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Joining me in a moment is Rob King. Rob is the CEO and co-founder of Zedify. We're going to talk about the customer experience in the last mile. We're going to talk about sustainability, greenwashing, and just a little bit of an update on cargo bike delivery. So, coming up in just a second is Rob King, CEO and co-founder of Zedify. Joining me on the line is Rob King. Rob is the CEO and co-founder of Zedify. And Rob, we're going to talk about some research that Zedify recently published. But before we get stuck into that, for anyone who doesn't know Zedify, could you just tell us a bit about the company? And I understand you've got some news to share as well.
Thanks, Ian. Really nice to be on the program. So yes, Zedify is all about doing deliveries in cities that are better, I suppose. And for us, better is all about that customer experience, making sure that your parcels turn up on time and don't get lobbed over a fence and eaten by the dog or whatever. But better for us also means better for our planet, and better for our cities. And that's really what drives me and all our team, how we can reduce the impact, reduce carbon emissions, and make our cities just nicer places to be.
Zero emissions, cargo bikes, that sort of stuff. That's what we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. So those are the most impactful vehicles to use. So that's what we do. And maybe it's worth just explaining a little bit about that and how that works. If you think about a typical big carrier, they will go and have a big logistics hub miles outside of a city, and the vans turn up every morning. They zoom down the motorway really nice and fast. But as soon as they hit the city environment with those big vehicles, they tend to get caught up in congestion, can't find parking. Nobody really wants them there because they tend to be polluting and noisy. And really all we do is create and have microhubs on the edge of urban environments that act as a gateway for deliveries coming into and out of the city, so that with a modern city that's, wanting to have fewer vans and less impact, that means we can use very specialist vehicles for that environment and essentially decouple the kind of trunking bit of it with what happens in a city. So yeah, we utilize big electric cargo bikes. They'll typically do 2, 3 or 4 rounds in a day, so they can actually deliver more than a typical small van. Lots more flexible for our customers and obviously wonderful for the planet as well.
And we had a discussion back in episode 279, everyone, if you want to scroll back through your podcast feed, where we talked a lot more about Zedify's operations and some of the ins and outs of running a low emission delivery company. Rob, before we get stuck into this research, there's one other thing you wanted to mention. You've just closed a funding round, I believe.
Yes, today actually we've just completed, which is really exciting for us. So it just means that we can continue on our mission in growing and working with more and more brands to really transform the way deliveries happen in cities and help out and make deliveries better.
Now, the research paper that you recently released, not you personally, Zedify published, was called The Impact of Parcel Delivery Services on UK Retail Success. We're just going to dive into some of the interesting findings that came out of this research. Rob, let's start with brand and delivery. We've talked previously on the podcast about how the last mile delivery represents, in some respects, the e-commerce brand. So do retailers see that? Do retailers see their last mile delivery partner as an extension of their brand?
I think absolutely. When you buy something online, there's no human interaction until often that very last point in the whole of that journey where you hand over that customer. So if that becomes a really bad experience, then you're left with the customer going, well, hang on, I thought this brand was all really cool. And suddenly, my parcel's been really badly damaged, or the person's turned up grumpy and thrust it at me. It doesn't leave a good experience. And, from my own experience, as well as the report, I was talking to one of our clients a little while ago about why they wanted to grow with us and what we were doing well and what we were also doing badly. But what we were doing well, they were like, well, you are an extension of our brand. And when I asked her to sort of detail that a bit more, they were like, well, we have a really small customer service team because we don't get complaints because you just do the basics well. And you also do a lot of work on our sales team. We don't need such a big sales team. So it really hits the bottom line as well, because your guys turn up and they, smile at the doorstep, and our customers go and say, what a great thing that we're doing. So there's some really good stuff, and how important that kind of doorstep experience is for brand and for brand sort of reputation.
What about the environmental aspect of all this? Are retailers paying more attention to emissions when in the last mile when it comes to those e-commerce purchases?
Definitely. And the research tells quite an interesting story. I mean, outside of the report we've done, I think it's around 82% of Gen Zers say that they will pay more for a sustainable delivery at checkout. Now, you know the answer to this. What's the reality? Actually, they don't. If you put a 50p extra saying this is going to be green, they don't. But the other side of it is really interesting, which is that out of the top 100 brands, the ones that are doing the best, the top 30, are the ones that have a really high sustainability index. So essentially, brands that are doing really well are investing in sustainability. So that's really telling us that customers don't want to pay for it, but brands absolutely have to invest in it. So they're all thinking about how they're going to invest in sustainability, how they're going to get to net zero. So it is very, very important to them. And that's very much what the report says.
And I want to get to the topic of greenwashing a bit later on because there's growing awareness of this issue in the delivery world. But while we're talking about customer experience, so what have you found are the key parts of getting the customer experience right in delivery?
Well, I think essentially it's just doing the basics. It's letting people know what's going on, when they're going to get their parcel, and then matching that with the actual, does that actually happen? So when you send out a message and some notifications to your customers and say, hey, you've got this wonderful parcel, it's going to be arriving with you, and Jeff's going to deliver it at 9:30 in the morning. If it doesn't turn up at 9:30, you're going to be pretty disappointed. So it's and things go wrong. So it's just making sure that you get the digital notifications and all that experience really right, and then back that up with the doorstep bit. And the doorstep bit for us, turning up on a cargo bike is really important for brand because it's a real signifier of intent from a retailer saying, actually, this is really about impact and sustainability. That's really exciting. Whereas if you turn up an electric van, it kind of still looks like a van. It doesn't say anything very different. And we also know that, a cargo bike uses a fraction of the carbon compared to even an electric van. From our own studies, that's more than a 90% savings. So it's really, really, really big. Whereas an electric van from a diesel van is only a 30% savings. So I think that experience on the doorstep is super important.
And it almost, this is going to sound a little bit strange, everybody, but when we train our delivery drivers, do we ever train them to smile when they deliver? Do we train them in interacting with the customer at the doorstep? We train them in safety, we train them in the technical side of things. Do we train them in interactions with the customer? Something perhaps for us to ponder.
I mean, it is important, and there's only, you can only be human, right? And which means that, you turn up, if you've been sat in traffic all day in a car or in a van, then, it's quite likely you're going to turn up frustrated, no matter how much training you do to say, cheer up someone's day. If you're not internally very happy, that's going to come out. And I think it's another thing with cargo bikes is that, it's a stressful job being a delivery person, no matter what mode of transport you're doing it in. But I think by using cargo bikes, you are, using exercise, so that frustration can come out and be released, in that activity, in that exercise. Whereas I think it can get pent up if you're just sort of sat still. That's my take on it. Anyway, I'm not sure we've got any great stats or research behind that.
Yeah, or research on how frustration being stuck in traffic impacts on the delivery experience. Perhaps one of the many academics that follows this podcast can take up the challenge. We'll all be interested in that. Let's talk about greenwashing, Rob. There's a lot of movement around this topic in the EU. Not that really impacts on the UK anymore. Anyway, everybody, we'll leave that to one side. But increasing scrutiny about the problem of greenwashing. So what are retailers' concerns about greenwashing when it comes to delivery?
Well, I think, if we look back a while back, sustainability was becoming a thing, but no one really dug down into the statistics. So you could do something as a bit of a sort of a marketing thing, even if you didn't want to bring it deep into your kind of business systems. And so you put something out, maybe you say, oh, we'll get Zedify, we'll have one cargo bike out of our fleet of 1,000, and we'll take all the pictures of the world and we'll say, hey, look, we're doing deliveries by cargo bike. And no one would look at the stats, whereas now they're looking at the hard data behind it, saying, what are you doing for carbon? What does this mean, this activity? And I think the sad thing is that a lot of big brands have in the past done some stuff where then people have gone looked at the data and gone, well, it doesn't really match up. That is greenwashing. So now, sadly, I think brands are very, very scared about doing anything positive because they don't want to get, boshed on the head, or just in case they do, or in case they've maybe got a stat a little bit wrong or they can't back it up. So I think it's doing some really good stuff as well as some bad stuff. On the good stuff, it means that those brands are really wanting to understand data. Okay, what does this mean? What is your grams per parcel? And how am I going to feed that into my net zero reporting? On the bad side of it, I think it means that people don't shout about some of the good stuff that they are doing. And we certainly work with a major retail brand that doesn't want us talking about it at all, which is a real shame, because I think they've come under they haven't been boshed over the head, basically. And I think they just don't want to put their head above the parapet just in case someone goes and takes a swipe at them. So that's the shame of it, because I think, we should really celebrate doing stuff, even if it's not perfect, right? That's important. These are steps that you take. And so I think for brands, a lot of the time they're thinking, well, unless I've got everything 100% knuckled down and I've got 100% green everything, I don't want to talk about it. Whereas actually they should be going, well, we know we're not perfect, but we are doing X, Y, and Z. And, over the coming years, we're going to do some more good stuff. So yeah, that's my take on the greenwashing, and what the report is really saying is exactly that.
I also think there's an opportunity for us in the delivery sector to be to encourage each other, even between competitors, in efforts to reduce emissions, whether it's through technology like route optimization, electrification, moving to alternative modes of transport, cargo bikes, push bikes, on foot, all those sorts of things. Anyway, it's not for me to editorialize right now. Rob, I'm supposed to be interviewing you. Before we wrap up, can you just share any other comments you might have on trends that you're seeing specifically in cargo bike delivery, since you have very much invested in that mode of delivery? What are you seeing there? Are you seeing more interest from retailers? Are there more volumes coming through? Are retailers really just still at a stage of asking the questions? What is the difference between delivering via cargo bike or just putting it in a van, or why can't we just put electric vans, or all those sorts of things? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I am seeing a huge change, certainly for us, in terms of interest. It's a real point of difference, but it's still very unusual to deliver by cargo bike. And the reason for that is that, it's a new market. And so that takes time for everything and all the infrastructure to grow around that. So, only a few years ago, you'd get cargo bikes that were really incredibly unreliable, and you'd find, buy all these new ones, and 6 months down the line, they wouldn't work. They are starting to become much better and much more reliable. And it would have been the same, 80 years ago in the van industry. Even I remember when I first started to drive, on a cold morning and having to use a choke, and would it start or would it not? This stuff does take time to grow. And then it's all the infrastructure around it, around sort of insurance and finance and servicing, etc. So the industry community and around it just needs to grow, and that needs a bit of time, and that is growing. But what we are seeing is that big carriers are getting majorly involved. We know Amazon are putting out hundreds of delivery cargo bikes on the roads at the moment across Europe, and it's not just trial. This is growing to something much, much bigger. So they know that they're onto something really good and exciting, and brands want to have a difference on that doorstep. It's not just an electric van and we keep with the same system. Transport is the one sector that isn't coming down in terms of carbon emissions, and it's the biggest looting sector. And the reason for that is that it's really hard. You've got big diesel trucks. There's not many alternatives at the moment. There are for vans, but electric vans only save 30% in carbon. It's not panacea. If we keep with the same system, we're not going to get to net zero. So we need to do something bolder, I think. And cargo bikes, they're not quite a panacea because they can't do everything, obviously. But what they can do is remove a certain number of vans and make some elements of that last mile much, much more efficient, and also obviously much more impactful.
Rob, there's a lot more we could talk about, but people who want to find out more can, of course, download the report that Zedify has published. So where can people go to access and download the report that Zedify has published on parcel delivery and UK retail success?
Well, just look up Zedify and you'll find it very easily. It's on our blog post on our website, but it's also on LinkedIn, wherever you find easiest to find it. But if you look up Zedify, you'll find it very easily.
It's always like when they used to say, available where all good books are sold, or in all good bookshops. Available where all good blog posts are posted. I'll stick a link on the episode page on thepostalhub.com to Zedify's website and how you can find your way to download this report. Rob King, co-founder and CEO at Zedify, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian.
coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast. Quick commerce, postal regulation, and other things. Don't miss any of these episodes. Subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast. PO Box, of course, is a POB, everybody. We all knew that. There we go, the new PO Box podcast, the Pobcast. Nobody'd listen to it, would they? Well, could we? Could we talk about post office boxes every week? Could there be enough content for a weekly podcast about PO boxes? Answers on a postcard, please. Anyway, subscribe in Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Please do subscribe to my email newsletters. Go to thepostalhub.com and follow the links. If you want to email me about anything at all, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.